What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my team selection for Game Week 1, a series that will run every single game week throughout the season where I talk about how my team is looking, thoughts on transfers, captaincy, and all that good stuff. If you're happy for it to be back and you're looking forward to it this season, make sure to give the video a like and hit that subscribe button and get your team selection rated for free by using the links in the description below to check out the My Team tool over on Fantasy Football Hub. Otherwise, let's get into it. So as always, let's start with the defensive picks. In goal, I've gone for Dean Henderson from Crystal Palace. Now we know that Sam Johnson's going to be allowed to leave if Palace get a suitable offer. And that leaves Henderson as the clear number one. Before I had Flecken, because I was worried that Henderson might lose his place at some point. That's probably not going to happen now. And I think Crystal Palace's fixtures in the short term are just better than Brentford's are. If you look at the first five, for example, you've got 3 home games against West Ham, Leicester and Man United, and the 2 away games of Brentford and Chelsea. So it's not that bad. Longer term, I think Palace's run is probably a little bit worse than Brentford. But because I'm not sure about exactly when I'm going to wildcard, I want to focus on the shorter term fixtures. If I knew I was holding that wildcard until much later in the first half of the season, I'd probably just go for Flecken instead. The goalkeeper on the bench is 4 million. I've gone for Slicker from Ipswich just because he's low owned. Now, if Johnston leaves, Palace do have Matthews, who's 4 million. So I could go for the goalkeeper combination from Palace so that if anything happens to Henderson, Matthews would just come in and I wouldn't have to make a transfer. But I'm a little bit worried about blocking that Crystal Palace slot. Because under Glasner, they looked good at the end of last season. If that continues into this season, there is a chance that I might want to have 2 outfield players as well as Henderson. So that's why I don't have the Crystal Palace backup goalkeeper as it stands. In terms of my defenders, I've got 3 premiums. If we're including Porro as a premium, right? So Trent, Porro and Gabriel from Arsenal. And then Barker on the bench, 4 million from Brighton. And then Robinson from Fulham at 4.5 million. Now, most of these premium defenders, I've gone back and forth on about whether or not to include them. And I'm still not completely sure whether I should have 3 premiums or whether I should drop one of Gabriel or Trent down to a 4.5 to enable me more money in attack. But I think with the attackers I've gone for, it looks pretty good and I can afford this defence. So if I can afford it, why not go for it? So Trent started the final pre-season friendly for Liverpool in what looked to be pretty much their first choice 11. He's going to be their first choice right back. I do think there's potentially a little bit of uncertainty over his minutes in the first few game weeks because he hasn't had a huge amount of minutes in pre-season. But I think he'll start. It'll just be like an early sub, maybe around the 75th minute could be possible because Bradley's had a good pre-season and he's just a good player. But in terms of starts, I don't really have concerns over Trent. I don't have concerns about the fact that Klopp has gone. I think there could be a drop-off, but it's probably not going to be massive. And ultimately, I just really like Liverpool's fixtures. And so Trent is someone that I really wanted in initially. He's not been in every draft. There is a chance I drop him by Friday. But if I can afford him, I definitely want him in. Porro, I'm still not 100% on, if I'm honest. I like the fact that he's nailed. I like the fact that he's super attacking. I also like Leicester away and Everton at home to start the season for Spurs. After that, it gets a little bit dodgier because you've got Newcastle away and Arsenal at home in game weeks 3 and 4. Brentford at home in 5 is fine. Then it's Man United away and Brighton away. But I don't want to get too bogged down on what's happening in game week 6 and 7. That's a long way off. By that point, I might even wildcard or anything. And I think with the defenders I've got on the bench, I can possibly cover Porro in game weeks 3 and 4, where he's got Newcastle away and Arsenal at home. And ultimately, if I have to play him against Newcastle, as much as I wouldn't be expecting a clean sheet, there is potential for attacking returns there. So I think Porro is going to stay. And the fact that he's 5.5 million is a big win as well. Because obviously, if I want like Van Dijk or Vardiol, I've got to find 0.5 from somewhere. And it's already getting quite tricky to find extra money. So Porro is probably going to stay, but he's not a lock. I think Dean Henderson is. Trent and Porro probably are. And then Gabriel. I have said for most of pre-season, I'm going to back against Saliba and probably back against the Arsenal defence in general. And I do worry longer term that Gabriel's minutes might not be as secure as they were last year. And the reason I've had that opinion is because Timber's available and they've signed Calafiori. But Calafiori's had hardly any pre-season with Arsenal and Timber has had a bit of a foot issue. Now, I don't think it's a major thing that's going to keep him out for ages, but I'd be very surprised if it's not Ben White, Saliba, Gabriel and probably Zinchenko to start the season. And when Calafiori comes in, he's probably going to play left back, which leaves Gabriel to play left centre back. And I think in the short term, game weeks 1 and 3 in particular, they're very good for Arsenal. Wolves at home in 1 and Brighton at home in 3. The rest of the 3 fixtures in the first 5 are not great, but Gabriel can be rotated. And if I get to game week 6 and I don't want a wild card, I've already got an Arsenal defender in place. And again, I am looking a little bit further ahead with him. And in game week 6 and 7, Arsenal have got Leicester at home and Southampton at home. So it's not a case of just putting Gabriel in for those fixtures only. The ones in game weeks 1 and 3 are decent. You can rotate him for those trickier away games against Villa, Spurs and Man City. And then Leicester at home and Southampton at home are pretty decent. So 4 out of the first 7, potential for clean sheet. And we saw in the last friendly against Lyon for Arsenal, set piece threat. It's just there. Saliba and Gabriel scored. And I just think generally Gabriel has got that higher goal threat. So that is why he's in, even though he's riskier over Saliba. But he's also lower owned. So I just want to back against Saliba in general. I think if I was dropping one of these premiums, the first one to go would probably be Gabriel because of those fixtures. But if I can get him for game weeks 1 and 3, I think he looks pretty solid. Barco is in because if I'm going to have a 5th defender that's 4 million, none of them have massive upside in terms of like Fass at Leicester, Harwood Bellis at Southampton. They're not going to keep a lot of clean sheets. If Barco becomes the first choice left back at Brighton, there is potential upside there. He might take some set pieces. If he's still playing in game weeks 4 and 5, the fixtures are really good. And that's where you can rotate the likes of Porro and Gabriel. And obviously, if he does do well, does take set pieces, gets attacking returns, his price is going to go up pretty quickly. And I just think out of all the 4 millions, he's the most likely to do that. And because I've got the 3 premiums, in Porro, Gabriel and Trent, if something happens where Barco's not getting game time, it doesn't matter. He just goes 5th on my bench. And I just don't play him, and I hope I don't lose too much value on him. Because although Porro and Gabriel got some dodgy fixtures, if I had to play them, I would. I'm not going to panic and start using transfers on them. I'm going to concentrate them on my attackers instead. So I just think there's too much upside with Barco to ignore him if I'm going with a 4 million defender. If I downgraded somewhere and I had money to spend, I'd probably go from Barco to Konza, because I just think he's probably a more solid option at 4.5. But for 4, Barco looks good. And then Robinson for Fulham is just in for rotation purposes. They've got some good fixtures early on. He's pretty much nailed, and he's quite attacking in that Fulham team. And we've seen in pre-season that the right back is not always going forward as much. It's Robinson that's providing width on the left. So if he can get forward and possibly get the odd defensive return with the fixtures Fulham have got and rotate in for some of those premiums at times, I think that looks pretty solid. So just a quick reminder before we take a look at my midfielders. We're only 3 days away now from the Game Week 1 deadline. This is the time to run your draft through the My Team tool on Fantasy Football Hub to get your rating completely free. And you can do that using the links in the description below. You don't even have to manually input the team. You can just upload a screenshot instead. So I'm going to go import team from an FPL screenshot on my phone, go to the photo library and click the first draft and then done. And in a matter of seconds, the team will be uploaded to the My Team tool. And then you can just save it from there. Easy as that. So I didn't want to spoil the rest of the video, so this isn't the exact draft I'm about to show you, but I've used it as an example, and I get a 94% team rating in the top left, which is pretty decent. And the 5 defenders are the same I've just talked about. So just to show you how good the rotation is, I would play Gabriel, Trent and Porro in game week 1. Then in game week 2, you've got Trent against Brentford, Gabriel against Villa away, and Porro against Everton at home. So I think Trent and Porro are fine, but at this point, I can bring Robinson in for Gabriel and just basically rotate him out for game week 2. Just save that, then go on to game week 3. Gabriel's got Brighton at home, so he's going to come back in for Porro. I'm going to play Trent against Man United away and probably Robinson against Ipswich away. And then we go to game week 4. If Barco is still playing at that point, he's got Ipswich at home. He could come in for Gabriel, who's got Spurs away. And then I've got Trent against Forest at home and Robinson against West Ham at home. And even if Barco wasn't playing, I could just play Porro against Arsenal at home. So it's really handy to see what the next few weeks are going to look like, especially around rotation with defenders. So if you want to get your rating for free, click that link in the description below. If you want to use all the other features of the My Team tool, there's 50% off at the moment. And again, the links you need are in the description below. Check it out. So in midfield, I've gone without Mohamed Salah, and it's not because I think he's a bad pick, because he's clearly not. I just don't like the sacrifices that need to be made to have both him and Haaland in the same squad. And ultimately, it's going to be one or the other. And right now, I'm going without Salah. And when I think about captaincy, he's great for game week 1 against Ipswich away. But I think Saka against Wolves at home, Isak against Southampton at home, even Haaland himself against Chelsea away are good alternatives. Whereas in game week 2, when Haaland's got Ipswich at home, the alternatives are just not as enticing for me, I would say. There's definitely other options. Like if we look at game week 2, you could go Salah against Brentford at home, Palmer against Wolves away, a different Man City player against Ipswich. But ultimately, I just want to captain Haaland that week. And it's not necessarily that he's going to be a long-term pick for me. At some point, I might get rid of him. But for game week 1, I'm probably going to go with him and without Salah instead. Unless something major happens in the next few days where there's loads of good value alternatives or a lot of those premium defenders I've picked are no longer options, I just don't see me fitting both players into the same squad. So I've gone without Salah. The actual midfielders I have picked are Nkunku, Eze, Saka and Garnacho. And then I've got Smith Rowe on the bench as a rotation option. I'm still a little bit undecided about who the best 5.5 million midfielder is, but I feel like Smith Rowe is a fairly decent shot at being good because of the fixtures that Fulham have early on. I can bench him for Man United away, which isn't a terrible fixture in itself. But then you've got Leicester at home and Ipswich away in game weeks 2 and 3. He's going to play attacking. He's going to play advanced. I think he's a pretty good option. Minter at Brighton is good too, but I don't like their fixtures as much. And there's a ton of other options. I'm not going to run through them all. I just think that Smith Rowe looks decent, and he does rotate quite nicely with my forward line as well, which I'll come on to in a minute. Nkunku at this point is pretty much a lock for me. I think he's definitely got the ability to be the best 6.5 million midfielder this season. Might not happen at the start, but I think they've got the fixtures after Man City at home to do that. I don't think it matters who Chelsea sign. Nkunku is going to be in their best 11. He doesn't have penalties, but his goal record and assist record at Leipzig was so good. If he gets minutes for Chelsea, I just don't see how he doesn't get the attacking returns. And there are lots of other 6.5 million options like Garnacho who is in this squad, but I don't think any of them are certainties. Like if I order them on the FPL page by price, you know, Rice I'm discounting. I don't want to block an Arsenal spot. Leon Bailey I think is good, but West Ham away, Arsenal at home, first 2 games. Champions League to contend with. He might get managed at some point. Mitoma, Brighton's fixtures aren't great. Any of the Chelsea midfielder I'm not interested in. Szoboszlai is not a guarantee to play as the number 10 week in, week out, so I'm not interested in him. Grealish, Doku, Savio, they could all play. Who's going to get the most minutes? I don't really know. And the list goes on, right? Even like Brennan Johnson, I think with Solanke, Spurs front 3 will most of the time be Son, Solanke and Brennan Johnson, but Kulusevski can play on the right as well. So there's just no other 6.5s that massively stand out. And I was so keen on having Nkunku last year, and we couldn't do it because he got injured. And this season, he's had a full pre-season. He's played some of the most minutes in that Chelsea squad. He's a lock for me now, I think, until, wrong phrase of words there, unless he gets injured. Eze is similar. I just think at this stage of pre-season, right, you've heard about Eze so much, you're bored of it, right? I get that. And sometimes when we hear about players that often, we try to go against them. But if you step back and look at what Eze offers, he's nailed on. The minutes are great. His underlying stats in terms of expected goals, expected assists last year, very similar to Foden, apart from you don't have any concerns about minutes. I think Foden will play in a majority for what it's worth. No concerns about that with Eze. He's on penalties as well. And the opening fixtures for Crystal Palace are pretty good. They're not amazing. They're not spectacular. They're not what you would handpick, but they're not bad either. So Eze will also be in for me. With Saka, I just don't want to pay the extra 0.5 for Palmer. So it's Saka versus Son. I think it's a really close call. If I was super aggressive and only going for the first 2 weeks, I'd probably pick Son for Leicester away and Everton at home. But I think Saka is a better long-term pick. And if I don't wildcard early, I want that. I want an Arsenal attacker later on when I think it's Leicester at home. And let me just find them here. Yeah, Leicester at home and Southampton at home in 6 and 7. And unlike the defence, I think the away fixtures aren't that bad. Like Man City away is going to be tough. That could be a 0-0. Could be really tight. But Villa away and Spurs away, there can absolutely be goals in those games. So I think Saka's the one for me. He's improved every single season. His numbers keep getting better in terms of expected goals, expected assists. He's on penalties. He'll almost certainly start. Now he started the last Arsenal friendly against Lyon, I think it was. He's just the one I want. Right? He was in the first draft I made. He's back in now. And then because of the way I've set this team up, I need another 6.5 million midfielder, and I've gone for Garnacho. There are slight worries about whether he'll start game week 1, but I think the fact that he came on in the Community Shield and he didn't play that many minutes in the Copa America, he basically only featured in the third group game, means he is going to be fit to start. The lack of preseason minutes is a bit of a worry, but I think he was so good last year, Ten Hag will want to get him in sooner rather than later, and he'll either be ahead of Rashford on the left or he'll be ahead of Amad Diallo on the right. He will play. If it's not game week 1, it'll be game week 2 onwards. I think because of that, he probably is one of the best 6.5s. I don't know if he's definitely the second best, but I think it's pretty close. And I just think because of the fixtures Villa have got, I'm going to ignore Bailey. I think Solanke puts me off Brennan Johnson a little bit now. So Garnacho is in. I mean, I could go down to another 5.5 with Smith Rowe and have $1 million to spend elsewhere, but I don't think there's a massive need for that. I'm happy to go in with a 4.5 million goalkeeper. So Garnacho's in. If I could downgrade another position like Smith Rowe, for example, to a 4.5, then Garnacho to Anthony Gordon could be an option. But I think it's better just to have that stronger squad overall. So that's my midfield. I think the midfield is what's been slated during pre-season, but I think if you look at it objectively, they're just good picks. Like, you might not think they're the best, that's fine. Everyone has an opinion, but that's not a terrible midfield by any stretch. And then up front, I've got João Pedro, Erling Haaland, and Alexander Isak. And Isak has been in every single draft I've made. He's completely locked in, barring Eddie Howe telling us he's injured ahead of the game week 1 deadline. And at that point, I would just downgrade him to Solanke and then probably do Garnacho to Anthony Gordon or something like that. Like, Isak is so good for game week 1 against Southampton at home that he's currently my captain. I'm not sure whether that will stick because I do like captaining midfielders, and I think Saka against Wolves at home is decent. But given that it's a newly promoted side, Isak's had a full pre-season, he is probably where I will go. I think most weeks it'll probably be Haaland when he's in the team. But the first game of the season, where Rodri might not feature, maybe Chelsea will give him a difficult game at home, I think it's probably worth betting against him, knowing that Haaland will definitely be captain in game week 2 against Ipswich. So I think those two are locked in. I don't see me going to a Salah-only draft. I think the overall squad is better for sure. But I just think because of the captaincy, I'm going to stick with Haaland. It doesn't have to be for the whole season. It might be that I get to game weeks 3, 4, 5, whenever it is, downgrade Haaland and put Salah in instead. Like, that's something I can do. I'm not locked into this forever, but I'm pretty sure at this point I'm going to start with Haaland. And then João Pedro, he was also in my first draft. He just offers such good value at 5.5. I'm pretty sure when he's fit and available, he's always going to start, or near enough, and he's on penalties. And because he featured in their final pre-season game, that's given me encouragement that he will start in game week 1. It's not a guarantee. He hasn't had a huge amount of minutes, but I think he's definitely in Brighton's best 11. And despite Welbeck scoring 2 penalties in pre-season with João Pedro off the pitch, I'm pretty sure that João Pedro will retain them. The fixtures for Brighton are not fantastic, right? Everton away, Man United at home, Arsenal away, first 3. But I think I play João Pedro in game week 1 and bench Smith Rowe. And then in game weeks 2 and 3, I can bench João Pedro. I mean, I'd probably play him against Man United at home, to be honest. But Arsenal away in game week 3, I can just bench him and play Smith Rowe. And that's why I quite like that rotation. So overall, I think that squad looks decent. I know people are worried about the lack of clean sheets, so there'll be concerns about the fact that I've spent so much money on defence. But I just think they're solid picks, and you just don't have to worry about them. You can leave them in the team while they're fit and available and make transfers elsewhere. If there's a bandwagon early on and Nkunku's not looking good, there's a 6 or 5.5 million midfielder I can downgrade. I've got options to move. Like, I can't get to Palmer or Salah in one move, but at some point you've got to make a choice and just go with it. You cannot set up a team where you can get to every single player in one move. And even if you did that, I think it's to the detriment of the rest of your squad. So I'm pretty happy with that. The player I guess I'm missing that a lot of people are going to ask about is Solanke. My opinion is, at Spurs, he's going to be around the same in terms of how good he is as an FPL pick as he was at Bournemouth, because he might not have penalties and his minutes might be slightly reduced. But to counter that, he's in a side that's going to score more goals. I don't think he gets massively better. I do like him, though. And one option I've got with this squad is to do something like Trent to Van Dijk, Gabriel to a 4.5 million defender, and just have 2 premium defenders instead, and João Pedro to Solanke. basically finding the money to do João Pedro to Solanke is definitely under consideration. I'm not sure which way I will fall before the deadline, but I can get out of my head how good value João Pedro could be. Now, we had these same discussions last year, and it didn't work out well. He got rotated, then he got injured and stuff like that. But if he is fit and available and he starts regularly, 5.5 million is going to be a joke. And I just feel like I want to start with that player instead. Like, if it comes down to it and Solanke looks essential, then Isak or Haaland would have to go. And you might turn around and say, well, you're never going to want to make that move. Well, that means that I've got two players that are pretty good already, and you cannot have them all. And you certainly cannot have them all this season when the prices overall have gone up. So I'm pretty happy. I think that looks good. Will that be the exact team I land on in by Friday at the Game Week 1 deadline? Someone will probably change, but I don't think dramatically. When I look at the team on Fantasy Football Hub's My Team Tour, that comes in with a 95% rating, which I think is the best I've had so far. And if I click on the AI transfers, I'm going to be interested to see who it thinks I should take out and go for instead. I'm going to guess that Vardiol should be in this team. It's just going to run it now, and we'll have a quick look. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. It's very quick to upload the screenshot. The suggested transfers takes a little bit longer. Here we go. Am I going to have to fill a lot of time here? Hopefully not. There we go. So yeah, Porro to Vardiol it really likes. The AI tool really rates Brereton Diaz as well. So what it wants me to do is Garnacho to Brereton Diaz to free up $1 million, to do Pedro Porro to Vardiol, which is 0.5, and João Pedro to Muniz, which is another 0.5. So it doesn't necessarily think that Brereton Diaz is better than Garnacho, but it's just to save that money. And as 5.5 million midfielders go, Brereton Diaz is decent. I mentioned just a minute ago maybe doing that and having two 5.5s. Muniz, I think, is solid, and I do really like Fulham's fixtures, but he's not on penalties. He won't be on penalties. And again, if João Pedro gets the same minutes, he's just better value. And with Vardiol, I'm not convinced he's going to be as attacking. But he probably will get more clean sheets than Porro. So that gives me something to think about. Doesn't mean I have to go with it. But I was already thinking that Garnacho to a 5.5 could happen. Anyway, I'm just rambling now. If you want to get your team rated for free, as I've said before, links in the description below. And if you want to use all the other tools, such as being able to scroll through, see your predicted points, get your suggested transfers throughout the season, 50% off at the moment. And if you sign up and don't win your mini league, you will get your money back. Terms and conditions apply for that. All the links you need are in the description below. Otherwise, let me know what you think of this team in the comments. Give it a like, hit that subscribe button, rate 5 stars if you've listened on podcast, and I will catch you again tomorrow.